Posthumous Memoirs by Madame Blavatsky, Chapter 2, Part 2. I made many visits to this famous synagogue of Notre Dame and its chamber of treasures, the outlying shrines, where there was always the full complement of postulants, beggars, and thieves, and began my study of Christianity, that ecclesiastic paranoia which has stifled the mental growth of the ages and brought people to idiocy and suicide, to say nothing of other evils, throughout the centuries of its dark predominance, and in the name of a man who is the incarnation of simplicity, truth, and natural living. Fancy his finding this monument of priestly stupidity, where he taught divine love, a mass of precious stones, embroidered vestments, golden images, and treasures of incalculable value, and outside, starving ones who were in the sanctuary, where bread was more scarce and as unobtainable as the treasures within, and peace was taught and given at each service with the blessing and turned into suffering and dismay as it reached the beneficiaries, and yet no one kicked in quotes. They took the lie at each service, the poor resigned and the rich self-complacent, and only once in a while, in an age when, enlivened by an avatar who comes to save suffering ones from this consuming peril of so-called religion, the poor starved fools rise in rebellion and shoot an archbishop as they would a wild animal. Does humanity betray even a smattering of common sense, but are plucked and robbed by these lying hirelings, working under forms of ceremony and ritual in the name of the Master, and turning their substance into the stone walls, treasure, and very truck of the church building, until they, in a moment of want, find that it is a religion of words, of proffered service and empty offerings, that the final blessing is a mere matter of words, and that the holy ceremony is to trifle still further with the supplicant and give nothing while taking everything. And yet they still go and come with never-varying constancy and revile anyone as a devil who would expose this never-ending farce. The treasure here would feed Paris 1 year alone, and the building house a host. It ought to be taken by the government and turned into a place for the poor to live, as well as every other one of these church buildings. The priests ought to be put in the army or at work and made to stop their mumbling creeds, which is a monotonous drivel and is an impediment in the future life and development of the nation. The street life and shops at this time afforded me much interest, and I loved to take long walks into the parks and along the trees of the dairy, where the great cows and other animals would come to me and give me a look of serious contemplation. They knew that I could be trusted, and their souls could read in me a sympathy and love for their state and being. I made many friends here, and especially among those who were emancipated from tradition and the foolish superstitions of the Christian faith. I was able to satisfy my cravings for strange and outlandish places and things, to travel with companions and persons thrown in my way, and in other times quite alone. Among my associations of this chance character was an American who gave me the first idea I had of the North American Indians, aside from that contracted by a perusal of Fenimore Cooper's novels. And I then contemplated a visit to America as one of the possible things in the near future. But I must not avoid mention of my life in London, that sempiternal necropolis, where in fog and soot are buried half the time 4 millions of beings in mortal life in close physical contact, and of every type from queen to the lowest and most abject subject. At this time it was only a cursory visit and gave no indication of its later significance, when, as leader of my own occult society, I was sought and surrounded by crowds to get the teachings of Master, and my own commentaries fought with and nearly vanquished by a host of adversaries, mainly among my own family, who, having by familiarity breeded contempt, sought my ruin and their own preferment. But of this I will write later on. At present, I was found daily within the vast rooms and the recesses of the British Museum, peering over old manuscripts into the tomb of Abyssinian kings, and tracing psychometrically from the unburied sculptures, images, and statues the real life of the people of those countries, and sought to establish in my memory the truth as found in the Akasas, or astral light, about them and their doings. I met here one of the Shabarans, or initiates, and for the whole time that I was in London, we were inseparable in our times of study and reverie. He was then a man of seeming middle age, but whether in actual incarnation or a transfused individuality, in brackets by taking on another body, close bracket, I could not say. It was a fact that he had the most advanced power over matter and could remove articles and bestow them at will. His mission at that time was to deposit some relics of the post-glacial period and also some other emblems of phallic significance, besides holding a place within the inner recess for the cellas and debutantes in occult lore to gather. We had long talks about the coming developments, and spiritism was a frequent subject with us. While he did not make much of its marvels, still he said that it was assured by their wishes to become a fact, as an antidote to the titanic devotion to mere memories of Christ and the creedal poisons which were stifling the world. It was sanctioned by the brothers, capital B, and under their guidance, besides receiving their help and good wishes. But its exoteric aspect was due to the ignorance of the world and the measure of truth, which it was considered would become the opening wedge to the fuller revelation, and in this I was to assist with my mediumistic powers and become the visible agent of the brotherhood, who could work the better by the protection of their absence. It was given more instruction. Let me start that sentence over again. I was given more instruction in the facility of phenomena, its use, and cautioned about abusing it, and was made receptive to the receipt of precipitated instructions when other means of impressing me failed. Also, how to invoke the elementary power, which was the basis of all the phenomena, the command of the beings of the inner sphere and their dangers in incipient use. And after much more association, I lost my instructor to the outer vision, and soon my mind settled upon the trip to America as being in the natural order of my mission and work. And in the month of July, in the year 1851, I went in pursuit of the Red Indians of my imagination to Canada, as it is put by one of my friends. And then, open brackets, Incidents in the Life of Madame Blavatsky by A P Sinnett, close bracket. I met some people one day with whom I was acquainted, and as they were about to sail for America, I thought it could not be better for me than to go with them. We made quite a party and took a vessel which sailed for the harbor of Boston. But while on the deep sea, the captain changed the destination, and found that we would land at the port of St. John's, New Brunswick, and from thence I left my associates and proceeded to Quebec and saw some Indians, but they were ruined by what is facetiously called civilization and totally worthless for my purposes, as I wanted to find out about their ghost dances, medicine men, and all their most interesting ceremonies of natural invocation. These events I found almost obsolete with them, and besides a driveling priest of the Roman Catholic Church and a minister who was half starved with him, they had lost or buried all memory of their ancient faith and beliefs, and were in a delightfully vague religious state. I was interested in these people, and I found that they had preserved one original trait, and that was the desire to take anything they could lay their hands upon. After some of them left, I found that they had taken all that I had lying around, and especially a pair of boots which I greatly prized, and which I could not replace in this outlying district. I saw plainly that the Red Indian, in fact, was totally dissimilar from my ideal, because in the process of time they had lost all their natural associations and were rapidly becoming a cross between the natives, indigenous to the soil as transplanted, and some of their worst members of the tribe who had left for the dense forest, and it was certain death to approach them or their habitations. Wigwams had given place to wretched buildings. Paths across the interminable forest had grown up with trees and weeds. The deer were hunted by men for gain, and the whole ensemble of the Red Indian had gone to the memory of the men, and I saw that it was useless to attempt to gain any knowledge in this direction. I then attempted to come into close relations with the Mormons, who were then commencing to excite public attention. But they were having a fight with some of their less industrious neighbors, and the survivors of the battle were then streaming across the plains in search of a new abode. Mexico seemed a good country for mysteries, and under stress of these disappointments, which were not, however, without their benefit, I invaded this inviting region, and, as I found later, at the risk of my life. In New Orleans, I was so fortunate as to see the Mardi Gras and the feast of St. Andrew. Upon the occasion of the latter, with that strange opportunism of which I have been the beneficiary in my arcane studies, I made the acquaintance of a yellow woman who bore every trace of being a reincarnated Brahmin, and it was due to her that I studied the aspect of voodooism, that middle branch of black magic which has for its object the ever-selfish desires of the embryo mystic upon the plane of Maya, or illusion. It was founded upon the same mantramic plane as the Eastern, but its objects were related only to the personal preferment of the supplicant, and naturally this did not satisfy my aspirations. It would scarcely be worth my while to go to all the trouble of the work and follow the formulae merely for the purpose of obtaining the love of someone whom I did not want, or to conjure a small sum of money to secure a temporary ascendancy over a rival in some affair of the heart or business in which the sole result was self. So, while I was under the patronage of my seeress and in her good graces, while she acknowledged that my faculties brought her an increased power, there still was nothing in unison to hold us together, and I assimilated all that she knew very quickly, and after a warning visit from my guru, Guro, Guro, or occult guardian in this vicinity, for they changed their personality with each locality, I took up my pilgrimage and thence to Mexico, through Texas, and upon mules and horse, through the wilds of the country in that part of the world. I managed to scratch along unscathed through rough communities, savage as well as civilized, and guarded alone by the force of my own fearlessness and perfect indifference to all possible assault or other attack. I had by this time resolved to make no stay in this part of the country, and the reason for this was the mixed astral condition arising from the Roman Catholic ascendancy, which brought me under an antagonistic force and defeated, abrogated, and almost suspended my communications with the Central Lodge. A country is dominated so much by the spirits of the dead that, where they are tainted with a form of thought like Roman Catholic, the air is charged with their magnetism, and a message sent by the overhead route is apt to be dissipated by these wily Jesuits. So I was careful to conceal my thoughts, and as much as possible strive to maintain the appearance of one of their own people. In this way I became an incessant visitor at their masses and saw all the churches of which Mexico is so full. Here it was that I saw a Jesus on the outside of one chapel dressed in green tights, and a wild bull in full pursuit, thus mixing the pastime of the thoughts of the people with their idea of an immortal life and their Redeemer. Such desolation as I here saw in the mental development of the inhabitants, and there was such an entire absence of intellectual vigor, that my heart sank to think that I was yet so far from my home of my master, and in a region where even in sleep my thoughts miscarried and I could not maintain my usual astral intercourse. I wrote to a friend whom I met in Germany and arranged at once for a visit to India, and with a Hindu whom God sent me in this wilderness, we went to the West Indies and went over via the Cape to Ceylon, and while taking a sailing ship in preference, we went on to Bombay, and I immediately separated from my companion and made my own way toward Tibet, intending to go through Nepal or the pass of Jaligore. Djelligore. I was always so much now in request because of the beginning of the phenomena that the loud sounds began to issue around me, and in many ways my company, in whom I reposed confidence, were acquainted with my power to make such a source of communication with the excarnate world, so that I was much worried by all of them, and it was with much difficulty that I could get the time to arrange my own affairs. Besides, various old men thought to make me their wife, as they said. Some of the women were mad after me, seeing in this force a way to come into prominence and gain some temporary advantage over their surroundings. In India, this power became redoubled, and I had to fight it off all the way through. It was for this reason that I thought of home again, and to rid myself of my friends, and in this incessant solicitation. But the War of the Crimea began and interrupted all plans, and failing to get into Tibet on account of my inexperience and the great antipathy and ignorance of the English, as well as the hatred of the Maharaja, who at that time would not allow any Ferengi in his dominions, I returned, but after having penetrated further than any other traveler before, and this was only accomplished by my assuming the costume of a shamana and taking his stores and tents. I went from Srinaga, Sronaga, to Kashmir, to Leh, Leh, and then across the most impenetrable range of mountains in the world, rock, glacier, and precipice, crevice, and terrible passes where there's only room for the feet and the body is out of perpendicular all the time. Over the Zoji La Paz, Zojila, Pass, over the Zoji La Paz. The coolies had to carry the baggage, and were it not for the caves and viharas, Viharas, in brackets, stores prepared by the nuns in their pilgrimages, close bracket, I should have starved and frozen. Still, I had made the attempt, and that gave me the satisfaction which I craved. Besides, I received orders now to try the countries of Japan and China and attempt to find in their vast ages of lore the Rosetta Stone or the Rosicrucian principle, and then my Vada Mecum, Vademecum. This was a promise to me that it was the road from apprenticeship to duty, and I went out again to America and traveled in the principal cities, now in the company of some people and again entirely alone, reaching San Francisco, passing Chicago, then a small place, and full of the indomitable energy which makes the average American a small volcano of tobacco, emitted in such quantities that it is a wonder that they do not go dry and wither up. Never in my life did I see such chewing and spitting. The whole place is full of nuisances, and the worst of it was that those who made the laws offended the greater, when they themselves should have been tried and convicted of the most serious offense against public decency that I ever saw. I stayed around here and in Hawaii, Sandwich Islands, and in Honolulu for a full 2 years, and then went to Tokyo and resumed my pilgrimages in the land of the Satsuma, Nagasaki, and studied the arts from the Japanese standard, also the legends and all the life which Arnold found so delicious and so aptly described in his published works, still alive in your mortal world. I found here a new principle of perspective in painting, and the basic principle of the retina orbit, or faculty of transcribing distance in a picture. This secret also gave me a clue to another one, that of the art of producing instantaneously a picture previously resolved from the astral elements in space. And this is a faculty to this day with the priests in the sacred temples of Japan, and an incident just here may become of moment felicitously related. One day I was one of a party who were going to see an old temple, where there was said to be some monks who had never seen the outside world in their entire lives. Desirous to learn in what manner nature compensated them for their solitude and what form of science they practiced, for all these old religions give their votaries and high priests something to think about besides the horrors of eternal crucifixion, I was promised to see a thought precipitation which occurred in this way. Taking us into the temple reserved for strangers, and just inside the sacred line in our bare feet, the high priest took some paper from a kaka, K-A-K-A, vase, or vase, and holding it over our heads, we were requested to think of some scene or picture. I instantly thought of my home in Russia, and when the paper was taken into the light, there was pressed upon it, in faint but perfectly formed lines, the whole surroundings of my family's estate, with each detail, and as things were placed, the day that the picture was taken, this being its most important feature, for if the picture was taken from my thoughts, what power gave it the character of the day that it was given, brought it out as of that very day, and showed all the changes that had been made since I left home, and of which I had not even been appraised of by letter. This could not have been my mental sphere, or copied, but from the astral light, giving a special prominence to a porch and pillars which had been placed before the porte cochere, PORT-COCHERE, since I had left home. The architecture of Japan is that of light character, to give zest to one's thought and lead the mind to gaiety and joy. I remembered well how difficult it would be to give phenomena here to suit a psychical research society, who would never be able to stop cracks or find a room sufficiently barren of crevice to stifle their useless and opaque suspicions, the whole idea being to secure open design and give free vent to air and light. At Tokyo I met some friends, and passing the straits, reached Calcutta on my second visit to India in the year 1856. Again I went to Lahore, and through Kashmir to Leh in Ladakh, wandering about, drawn by one or another fancy, witnessing at times marvels and at other times studying Sanskrit, Aryan legends, and visiting temples, cemeteries, caves, valleys of the dead, and touring much in the character of the phlegmatic British. I again attempted to make the pass into Tibet, but finally being instructed that I must go to Europe again to avoid the coming troubles of 1857, I sailed from Madras to Hamburg, passing some time with some soldiers of the German army whose companion I had previously been when in male disguise in the army and navy, and from this time began to receive the notoriety which was destined to accompany me the balance of my career, and without which I could not have left my memory and design in the occult field. I had changed my name so many times by this or other affairs that I did not really remember but vaguely who I was. Think of it, I had been male and female alternately as it suited my purposes and surroundings. I was changing my social status also in every place, and had begun to permit and solicit from my inner self a varying permanence in conduct, which gave me much needed variety and relief from monotony. My body seemed to become the repository for ever-changing individualities, intelligences, powers. I was charged by different emotions and desires. Sometimes I thought one thing right, and then another time knew it was totally wrong. I could not put my finger on myself and say that I was my mother's daughter or the son of anyone. The whole world became to me a myriad, varied and changeful place, full of methods, events, and curriculum, entirely at variance with established usage, and opposed in act to the very dogmas it upheld. I became entirely free from myself and was able to live 100 lives in the same era, in the same form, and yet my own self was ever present and actively observant of the procedure of each intelligence, its conduct, and the details of its synchronous affinities in everyday correspondence. For I found also a new problem at this time, and this it was: as each new ego possessed me at my good will, and I loaned them my body and movements to achieve their wish, they began the operation of their own destiny or karma instead of my own, which was entirely abrogated or suspended during the time that they had use of my organism. Thus, in Asia, I was taken by Morientis and other forms of intelligence which had lived and passed into the ether. They brought me into contact with their own companions and literally dragged my body through incredible events and achieved some work which they were meditating for eons of time and accomplished by me, a total stranger, yet being received by those of their family and countrymen, seemingly with a gleam of recollection or at least with sufficiently cordiality to enable the spirit to accomplish the wished for result. And this my own soul would study as it stood aside and watched the whole procedure, sometimes lasting for days at a time. In this way, my entity had been invaded by soldiers, women of the street, brigands, statesmen, patriots, priests, serfs, scholars, and all, and every sort of intelligence, each using for themselves the wished for opportunity, and in return giving me some good service and safe conduct, or an allegiance won from their own people by a spiritual feeling of fraternity, when they were not acquainted with me at all, and yet felt the soul power, and knew that it was something they must recognize and assist. In this way, I escaped the consequences of many a dilemma which brought about my intrepidity and fearlessness, which were, in turn, the result of my feeling that at the doubtful moment I would be carried safely over all manner of difficulty and through each incident of risk. I remember that I won a wager from a friend who so well knew my power to impersonate almost any character. It was arranged for me to serve as a female waiter, and to prove that the individuality of the place and sphere actually would take possession of me and give me the nerve to effect the fact. It was in one of the restaurants in Paris, I believe the one on the Faubourg, Faubourg, Saint Antoine, and I mention it because it will serve to show how the details of my wanderings became obscure and dismal by the time that they reached my family and my friends, which they did often by their superserviceable gossip of travelers whom I met, and in other ways. My aunt wrote me a heart-rending letter about my condition in alien lands, but I had neither inclination nor time to attempt to explain. I can only say that they arose by reason of such incident as the waiter's story, and which was merely done as a wager and to prove a metaphysical theory. After spending some months at some of the lesser towns in France and Germany, I rejoined my family somewhere near Pskov, Pskoff, in the northwest of Russia, about 180 miles from St. Petersburg, and found them, as I left them, in the midst of a family wedding. But the victim this time was not myself as formerly, and I could not but draw inferences and deductions at the silly sight. Still, I said nothing, but attempted to find rest from incessant wandering in the family home, and at least enjoyed some good food, properly cooked, which was a great relief from all sorts of messes, which I had had to endure at the various pensions throughout the breadth and length of the lands. And that concludes Chapter 2. And Chapter 3 is entitled Mediumship in Russia. So I look forward to that, and I hope you'll join me there. Till soon.